I think that to tell someone you are enough, there's nothing you need outside of yourself to be made complete or whole. All the tools that you need for yourself are going to be found inside of yourself. When we tell people that, we're really putting a burden on them that they can't carry.
Actually, the journey to trying to be enough, to try to be enough for yourself, for your kids, or your husband, that actually depletes you. It actually exhausts you.
So, Alisa, let's jump into your book here. Can you share a few of the other lies that you unpack in the book?
Yeah, well, I think one of the big ones, and we see this stitched on pillows, we see it in books, and we see it in media, and it's the phrase, you are enough, or I am enough. Now, that phrase, I get what people are thinking. If there's somebody in your life who has been spoken over with a bunch of lies, maybe they've been told you're nothing, you'll never be anything. And you that's the thing you want to say to them, right? You want to be like, no, you're enough. And I get why that feels encouraging, but let's follow the logic down the rabbit hole a little bit. I think that to tell someone you are enough, there's nothing you need outside of yourself to be made complete or whole. All the tools that you need for yourself are going to be found inside of yourself. When we tell people that, we're really putting a burden on them that they can't carry. Because deep down, we all know, I know that I'm not enough. I know that, especially when this truth became really clear to me when I was a young mom with new babies, a first-time mom, and I just felt like I was blowing it all over the place. I tell this story in the book where I was just sitting at the mall one day, just feeling like, is this ever going to get easier? And how odd that message would have been to me if somebody would have just said, you know what, you're enough. I would have said, no, I know that I'm not. I know I'm blowing it all over the place. And so what we're actually telling people when we say you're enough is we're basically saying that you have to solve all the problems that you're causing. My friend Allie Beth Stuckey, she wrote in her book, she said, the self can't both be the problem and the solution. And I think that's such a great quote because we're putting a burden on people saying, you have to solve all your own problems. And we know that we can't because as Christians, we know that if we dig down to find those tools within ourselves, we're going to find a broken moral compass. We're going to find a person who is bent towards sin. And we can't fix that in and of ourselves. That's why we do need to go outside of ourselves to the person who really is enough. And this is why I love to give this message because the answer to I am enough is that Jesus is enough. And that's such good news because he's better than I'll be anyway. So I like to think of it this way. If we think about how the Bible talks about the righteousness of Jesus, of course, Jesus living that perfectly sinless life that you and I could never have lived or accomplished. And then that righteousness that he accomplished, when we trust in him, the Bible talks about that being imputed onto us, kind of covering us like a garment covers a person. And so when God looks at us, he doesn't see our sin, he sees the righteousness of Jesus. So I say it like this, I'm not enough, you're not enough, but Jesus is enough. And when you trust in Jesus, his enoughness gets put on you so that when God looks at you, he sees the enoughness of Jesus. And Jesus is way better than the best person who's ever lived. And so wouldn't you want that on you? Wouldn't you want to be covered in that rather than be scrambling around inside yourself to try to solve all these problems that yourself started in the first place?
Allie, you've written a book called You're Not Enough, and That's Okay, Escaping the Toxic Culture of Self-Love. And then in the very beginning of the book, you talk about your own struggle with this issue of self-love. Can you just recount that journey for us?
So I decided to write this book, I think it was in 2018, because I just noticed that a lot of my fellow women, and especially fellow Christian women, were talking a lot about self-love, self-care, self-empowerment. And it was just strange that I was hearing this from Christian women, and Christians are supposed to die to self. And actually scripture said that in the end days, people will be lovers of self, and they don't say that in a good way. And so I kind of thought that this was strange. But then when I realized, I was kind of looking back at my own journey in life, I realized that I had kind of struggled with this idea too of wanting to be the solution to my problems, wanting to be enough for myself, trying to prove that I am self-sufficient, that I didn't need God, that I didn't need his rules. And I think that's what a lot of women are doing today when they're latching on to kind of the self-love movement. So for me, it started in college, and I was raised a Christian in a Christian home, and I really did take my faith seriously end of high school, beginning of college. And then a few things happened, which I talk about in the book, that kind of sent me into this spiral of trying to figure out who I was, what my purpose was. I had kind of a crisis of faith my senior year of high school. I started drinking too much. I had bad relationships. I ended up having an eating disorder. And it was all really trying to find acceptance and wanting to be loved and wanting to be wanted and really wanting to be enough and trying to prove that I didn't need the boyfriend that I had had. I didn't need God. I didn't need anyone. I could be fulfilled and have fun and be independent without needing anyone else, and certainly without needing any standards or rules. And that obviously put me at a dead end. Now, thankfully, providentially, as I talk about in the book, there was a Christian counselor who, rather than just, coddling me and telling me a lot of the things that unfortunately women hear today, she just said, look, you are killing yourself through this eating disorder and through this destructive behavior. And if you want to die when you're 22 or 23, keep it up, basically. And I didn't want that. Really, the image of that happening, the idea of that happening and kind of coming to terms with the fact that I was addicted to to a lifestyle that was sinful, but that also wasn't good for me. And that I could really hurt the people around me. It really kind of stopped me in my tracks. And then I had let sin get so far and I had let things snowball so much, even though I knew better. And it really just filled me with a lot of shame. And I know that shame is typically used today in a completely negative sense. We're told that we're not supposed to feel ashamed of anything, but I actually think that we are supposed to feel ashamed of sin. I think we're supposed to feel really sad and really grieved over sin. And it took a Christian counselor telling me a really hard truth and telling me what my destructive behavior was doing to kind of, I don't know, awaken that shame in me. And I really thank the Lord for that shame. Like, I thank the Lord for feeling so guilty and so bad and so sad over just how far I had gone and his faithfulness to me and sharing that hard truth with me and bringing me back. And what I realized in all of that, of course, later, as I'm thinking through these messages that we see on social media, that you are enough, you're good enough the way you are, you're perfect the way you are, all of these things, is that I had actually bought into those lies. And so I talked to a lot of different women as I was writing this book. Like, have you struggled with these lies? There was one woman that I talk about in the book. She was a mother and she had 2 babies right in a row. And, for moms who are in that newborn stage, you're in the thick of it. It is so hard. And gosh, if you ever know that you're not enough, it's kind of in those days when you're so tired and your energy is just zapped. But she said that she was turning to these Facebook groups that were telling her that, all she needs to do is focus on herself. All she needs to do is, more self-care and more self-focus, and really kind of talked about her kids as they were burdens. And she really turned to this stuff to try to make herself feel better. Long story short, that didn't work. She actually ended up being almost suicidal. And it wasn't until, again, she kind of had this reckoning with her husband and telling him, how she's struggling and all of that, that she realized that actually the journey to trying to be enough, to try to be enough for yourself, for your kids, or your husband, that actually depletes you. It actually exhausts you. We're not enough. And the good news of the book is that that's not just okay. It's really good news, because Christ is our sufficiency. If we were enough for our salvation, for our sanctification, for our strength, we would not need Christ. But we needed him so much that he actually died on the cross, a brutal death that he did not deserve, because we're insufficient. Our sufficiency in all things, salvation and otherwise, comes from Christ. And trying to find our sufficiency in ourselves or elsewhere is just going to exhaust us.